verse 1. And Joseph was brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him of the hands of the Ishmaelites, which had brought him down thither. So Potiphar's name meaning belonging to the son. Potiphar was that Pharaoh, we got to remember that was like the king or the head of Egypt. That was just kind of like a generic name for the king. So Potiphar was an officer of him, captain of the guard. So he was kind of a higher ranking, so to speak. Captains are typically leaders of like company size units in the military. And Potiphar's name meaning belonging to the son, this kind of shows the Egyptians' beliefs at this time, how they were worshipers of gods and false idols, false gods and false idols, because his name meaning belonging to the son, he was probably named after them worshiping false idols. So, verse 2. And the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a prosperous man, and he was in the house of his master the Egyptian. So I want to pay attention here to the Lord was with Joseph. So we know the trials he just went through with his brothers, literally selling him unto slavery. We're going to see that the Lord was with Joseph is kind of repeated over and over in this chapter, and it really shows emphasis on God intervening and guiding and protecting Joseph in this time of need. And Joseph was in the house of his master, showing that he wasn't a man of like a field laborer. He was a man of the household management. So kind of off-put here. It's kind of not natural for a man to be over the household management side. So just keep that in mind. God was, even from the beginning, looking after Joseph, even in his slavery. So verse 3. And his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all that he did to prosper in his hand. So Joseph's master, Potiphar, Egyptians in this time mostly weren't Christians and followers of God. So Potiphar most likely wasn't a man of God, but just through Joseph's actions and his way of success through his actions was kind of like him, like we talked about, reflecting God, being that mirror to God, to where Potiphar, who most likely wasn't a believer, his master, was able to see that Joseph had something divine within him. He could see, he could witness God, even though he wasn't a follower, maybe not even known God, just through Joseph's actions and God being with him. So, anyway, verse 4. And Joseph found grace in his sight, and he served him, and he made him overseer over his house, all that he had put into his hand. So Joseph was Potiphar's slave. God was with him, and he led him to success. He led Joseph to success. So Joseph did what he was told. He followed and did his best with Potiphar. So now Potiphar makes him the head over his house. He's the overseer of his house, his assets. So once again, showing that Joseph, being a righteous man of God, God, even in Joseph's slavery, is kind of blessing him. Now he is over other slaves that Potiphar's over his whole house, his house management and all. So even in slavery, through God's divine intervention, he's still prospering. So verse 5. And it came to pass from the time that he had made him overseer of his house and over all that he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake, and the blessing of the Lord was upon all that he had in the house and in the field. So once again, Joseph being a man of God, God divinely interacting with Joseph throughout his slavery. So now he's over Potiphar's household, his animals, his crops, his assets, all that he has. And Potiphar, who most likely wasn't a believer, is now being blessed for Joseph's sake. Joseph reflecting and having that divine interaction with God, now reflecting onto others. So this just really goes to show that being a child of God isn't always teaching and preaching to others. We got to remember that it's important that sometimes you can spread God's light just through your actions or way of life. So works are important. Remember, faith without works is dead. Having a loss of words trying to witness to someone, I know we've talked about it before, God may have other plans and other ways you can witness to others. Same thing we're seeing with Joseph here. He's reflecting God to Potiphar and Potiphar's house through his action. Verse 6. And he left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he knew not aught he had, save the bread which he did eat. And Joseph was a goodly person and well favored. Once again, Joseph being recognized through his divine lead by God. Verse 7. And it came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast her eyes upon Joseph, and she said, Lie with me. So wait a minute. Joseph, exactly what you're thinking. I seen Jasmine's face. But Joseph being blessed by God, living by God's word, and it's reflecting onto Potiphar's house. Now, of course, there has to be a temptation to sin. There's always a temptation to sin. So his master's wife cast her eyes upon Joseph. Now she's trying to go after him. She's trying to... It's adultery is what it is. So, long story short. So, we just got to remember, Satan always tries to come after the children of God, his children. So, it's easy to not tempt. He doesn't have to tempt non-believers, but believers and righteous people of God, that's who they come after the most. So, sin being tempted to Joseph when he was being and leading by God's divine intervention, divine lead. So, let's see how this takes place. So, verse 8. But he refused, and said unto his master's wife, Behold, my master wotteth not what is with me in the house, and hath committed all that he hath to my hand. So wotteth meaning to be aware of. He's telling her, my master is to know all that goes on, all because he's left me overseer. I'm to report to him. So notice here, Joseph's not reacting angrily. He's not refusing angrily. He's still a slave. He knows his place, and he is to also honor his master's wife. But he responds immediately and directly. He's leaving no room for question on his decision, leaving no room for assumption. So, temptation, especially in adultery in this day and time, is very, very common. So, we can use Joseph's actions here as an example on how to react during temptation to sin, all temptation to sin. Don't leave room for pondering. Don't leave room for second guessing, but also respond respectfully and directly. Leave no gap, but you can respond politely. Verse 9. There is none greater in this house than I. So this is Potiphar's wife speaking to Joseph. Neither hath he kept back anything from me but thee. So she's saying, Potiphar's kept nothing from me but you for this whole house. Because thou art his wife, how then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? So that's Joseph's response to that. If you're his wife, how can I do this wickedness and sin against God? Verse 10. And it came to pass, as she spake to Joseph day by day, that he hearkened not unto her to lie by her or to be with her. So Potiphar's wife keeps going after Joseph over and over to the point where Joseph doesn't even want to be around her, doesn't even want to be in her presence. So Joseph's really proven his commitment and faith not to sin against God right here, not to commit that adultery against his master's wife. She's constantly harking on him over and over again. He's leaving no room for assumption at this point. Verse 11. And it came to pass about this time that Joseph went into the house to do his business, and there was none of the men of the house where within. So Joseph entered into the house of Potiphar to handle his job to be the overseer. No one else was in the house at this time. No other housemaidens, house workers, anything like that. So none of the other men servants were around. It was just him and Potiphar's wife in there. Verse 12. And she caught him by his garment, saying, Lie with me. And he left his garment in her hand and fled and got him out. So garment meaning covering or clothing. And once again, he's reacting immediately. He's not leaving any room for assumption. He sheds his garment and takes off from her presence, okay? But she's again asking him, while she's got a hold of him to lie with him, he flees. Leaves his shirt, leaves his jacket, whatever piece of clothing it was behind, just to get out. So, we'll keep going. Verse 13. And it came to pass, when she saw that he had left his garment in her hand, and was fled forth, Joseph fled, left his garment in her hand after she asked him to lie with him. You can kind of see where this is going now. Verse 14. That she called unto the men of her house and spake unto them, saying, See, he hath brought in an Hebrew unto us to mock us. He come in unto me to lie with me, and I cried with a loud voice. So this wife is speaking to the others of the house, showing them Joseph's garment and trying to kind of manipulate or brainwash, trying to paint this picture of what happened. And her saying that her husband brought in a Hebrew or outsider from them, he then made him overseer of the house. That outsider is mocking him. When back in this time, well, we'll get there later. But anyway, so she's trying to paint this picture that he was coming on to her. He fled and left his garment in her hand when she cried out of panic, when really it was her coming on to him. So verse 15. And it came to pass, when he heard that I lifted up my voice and cried, that he left his garment with me and fled and got him out. So continuing to paint this picture, to just paint this bigger image of what happened and how he came on to her. She'd been going after Joseph time and time again. And remember, Potiphar was an officer unto the Pharaoh, so he was kind of like a higher up in his ranking. So his wife was probably a pretty beautiful woman, probably well seen upon, and we can assume that her being turned down wasn't really common. So the image that she's painting would probably be easily believable, okay? A slave, an outsider, a Hebrew slave coming on to her, she's a wife of a higher ranking, outside looking in, it makes sense. Verse 16. And she laid up his garment by her until his Lord came home. So she's, once again, further painting that picture to help her lie. Being kind of petty here, putting his garment beside her, laying up until Potiphar comes home and can see it when this has already taken place. Verse 17. And she spake unto him according to these words, saying, The Hebrew servant which thou hast brought unto us came in unto me to mock me. This is what I was going to point out earlier. Egyptians back in this time were very suspicious to foreigners. I don't want to say racist, they were just very cautious of foreigners. And his wife keeps highlighting the fact that Joseph is a Hebrew, a foreigner to them. So this helps kind of enhance the status and suspicion for his acts. So all the natives to Egypt were very suspicious outsiders. This is helping that lie. This is helping further paint that picture. Verse 18. And it came to pass, as I lifted up my voice and cried, that he left his garment with me and fled out. So she's finishing her lie, her picture she painted to Potiphar, explaining to him her point of view, which was a lie. Verse 19. And it came to pass, when his master heard the words of his wife, which she spake unto him, saying, After this manner did thy servant to me, that his wrath was kindled. So I want to pay attention here, or I want us to pay attention here, that it doesn't state whether Potiphar believed or didn't believe his wife. It just says that he was angry. So we need to look at this situation from his point of view. Whether he believes his wife or not, if he does believe his wife, then he just lost his best slave, his overseer of his home. If he doesn't believe his wife, then he still can't shame his house by somewhat honoring this whole situation and dishonoring his wife. It's a lose-lose for Potiphar here. So either way, he's going to have to punish Joseph. He doesn't want to be embarrassed by bringing in a foreign, a foreign Hebrew and then dishonoring his wife, but he also doesn't want to dishonor Joseph, his people. So verse 20. And Joseph's master took him, that being Potiphar. Potiphar took Joseph and put him into the prison, a place where the king's prisoners were bound, and he was there in the prison. So he was incarcerated. Very common punishment in Egypt, being put in prison. We still use this punishment to this day. Verse 21. Here we go again. But the Lord was with Joseph and shewed him mercy and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. So Joseph, who through all this kept his loyalty, love, and honor for God, the Lord gave him favor over the whole situation. But not only that, pretty much the warden of the prison. So God continuing to lead and protect Joseph. God knows the truth of the whole situation. So even though everyone else kind of believes Potiphar's wife and how they portrayed him, God knows the situation and still gave Joseph favor for it. Verse 22. And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners that were in the prison, and whatsoever they did there, he was the doer of it. So keeper of the prison, once again, like the head of the prison, the warden. And take a look at that phrase, committed to Joseph's hand. The warden over the whole prison made all the prisoners kind of answer to Joseph. So when Joseph was a slave, he was sort of like the head of the house, the head of the slaves. Now that he's cast into prison through God's divine interaction and him honoring God's covenant, now he's the head of the prisoners. So once again, we just keep seeing that Joseph keeping his faith and keeping righteous to God, that God's blessing him for it, even through slavery, prisoner. Verse 23. The keeper of the prison looked not to anything that was under his hand, because the Lord was with him, and that which he did, the Lord made it to prosper. So the warden paid no mind to anything Joseph was over, because he knew Joseph would handle it through God. He had God's interaction, his intervention. So once again, the warden of this prison, he was most likely an Egyptian. He probably wasn't a follower of God, but we keep seeing that through Joseph's actions, he's reflecting God's light even to non-believers. And these non-believers are somewhat honoring Joseph through his divine prosperity. So we're actually going to continue on through verse 40 here. So Genesis chapter 40, verse 1. And it came to pass after these things that the butler of the king of Egypt and his baker had offended their lord the king of Egypt. So as it came to pass after these things, showing that a period of time took place, there's like a chronological order of a period of time, so this is later. So these men were chief officials of the Pharaoh. They both served him firsthand. So this was a pretty big deal to offend the king of Egypt, or the Pharaoh, and especially his firsthand servants. So verse 2. And Pharaoh was wroth against two of his officers, against the chief of the butlers, and against the chief of the bakers. So he had hate towards them. They offended him, two of his firsthand servants. Verse 3. And he put them in ward in the house of the captain of the guard, into the prison, the place where Joseph was bound. So he put these two firsthand servants into prison for offending him, right where Joseph was, same prison. Verse 4. And the captain of the guard charged Joseph with them, and he served them, and they continued a season in ward. So the Pharaoh was so upset with the butler and baker that he sentenced them to a season or a term in prison just for offending them. And the prison where they are now, Joseph is the head prisoner. He's the overseer of all the other prisoners. So they all answered to him, and Joseph was responsible for them. So now Joseph is responsible for two of the head servants from Pharaoh. So verse 5. And they dreamed a dream, both of them, being those first-hand servants. Each man his dream in one night, each man according to the interpretations of his dream, the butler and the baker of the king of Egypt, which were bound in prison. So both of these men experienced a dream while they were sentenced in prison, and as we know and we've seen in past chapters so far, a commonly used way of divine communication is through dreams, is through visions. And these two men, being those head servants of the Pharaoh, may not have been followers of God. They might not have been well versed. So God using these dreams to communicate with all people, maybe believers or non-believers. So verse 6, and Joseph came in unto them in the morning, and looked upon them, and behold, they were sad. And he asked Pharaoh's officers that were with him in the ward of his Lord's house, saying, wherefore look ye so sadly today? Verse 8, and they said unto him, we have dreamed a dream, and there is no interpreter of it. And Joseph said unto them, do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me them, I pray you. So these men obviously were a very well-versed men of God, and they had this divine dream, and they couldn't understand it. They weren't men of God. So now they're looking for an interpreter. Lo and behold, the man who's the overseer of them happens to be a very well-versed man of God, an inheritor of God's covenant. So we're going to kind of stop there and kind of leave a cliffhanger for next Sunday. But I just wanted to go through the first 8 verses. But starting all the way back to Joseph being sold by his brothers and being a slave in chapter 37, to them being falsely accused of sleeping with his master's wife, to them being in prison, what's the one thing that hasn't changed throughout Joseph's life? His commitment and his honor to following God's guidance and word. So he kept his faith when he was enslaved, so then God led him to be the overseer of his master's house, his home, all of his assets. He kept his faith when he was in prison for being falsely accused of sleeping with his master's wife. So then what happens? God led him to be the overseer of the prisoners. So many times, even in our own lives, we say, God, why am I in this position? God, why are me and my family going through these hardships? Why are all these bad things happening? We have to remember, and Joseph's story being a pretty great example of this, we can't always see what's ahead of us. We may not understand why God is giving us these trials, these tribulations, but one thing we do know, we see here in Joseph's story through biblical evidence, that as long as we commit our faith and trust in Him, in God, no matter what speed bumps, trials, tribulations, whatever it is we face, God will protect us through it. And He always protects and leads His faithful servants through all. And being strong in our faith and fully committing to God's way and not our own, which is hard to do, God's way will always bring us to the top, bring us out on top, and not just we made it through things. He will let us prosper. He will bless us. And at the end of this chapter, I wanted to go through those first 8 verses to show that God will be with His people and help us prosper to where we can help others who may not be followers of Him and we can help reflect His light unto others. And I just wanted to make note there that look at all the trials Joseph goes through day in and day out. He kept his faith. Even as a prisoner, even as a slave, he prospered through his relationship with God. God always brought him out on top and helped him witness to others. So just keep that in mind. No matter what trials, tribulations you go through, look at Joseph. Keep your faith, and God will bring you out on top. Help us prosper.